Welcome to Economics Design. Today, we're still on the topic of stablecoins, and we're going to introduce another stablecoin called Liquity. We're going to analyze the economics of Liquity. It's very interesting because this stablecoin does not have any governance at all. There are two tokens, but the secondary token is not a governance token. So I want to explain and share a little bit about what this mechanism is. So hopefully by the end of this entire series, you have a better understanding of the different kind of mechanisms that could go into designing the stablecoin, how to build that, how to create stability, and that will give you some ideas when you're going back to create your own tokens or when you're analyzing other kind of tokens. Disclaimer, nothing is investment advice, everything is purely educational. We'll cover a few things today. What is Liquity? How is the stablecoin created? How is the stability maintained? Why is this stablecoin different? And some thoughts and opinions. So, Liquity. Remember, when we're analyzing any protocols, we're looking at three different pillars: the market design, mechanism design, and token design. Today, when we're looking at Liquity, we're looking very specifically at token design, and we're talking about the token policy as well as financial incentives. This is most relevant when it comes to understanding the entire analysis of stablecoins. The other thing that's important in stablecoins will be market design. I've created a report that analyzes 8 different algo stablecoins. It's on econteric.com. Go check that out because there I show you how I've done these different fundamental analysis across 8 different protocols using market design, mechanism design, and token design. Things could be qualitative or quantitative. How do you match them together to create this understanding of the various metrics that we use to measure how robust the design is? So let's get started with LUSD. LUSD is the token, the stablecoin token of the Liquity protocol. Remember, when we are looking at analyzing and classifying and understanding stablecoins, we look at them in 4 different ways. What is the mechanism? What is it pegged to? What is the collateral amount? And what is the collateral type? For LUSD, it uses 2 mechanisms, a dual token and a reserve. It's soft pegged to USD, and the collateral type, the collateral amount, it is over-collateralized and it uses just ETH as collateral type. So what is this dual token that we're talking about? There are 2 tokens in the system, LUSD, which is a stablecoin, soft pegged to USD, and the other one is Liquity, LQTY token. This token is not a governance token, it's purely a value accrual token. When we talk about value accrual, there are a lot of fees that can be generated, or there is a liquidation fee that's generated from the system. There, these LQTY holders will be receiving the liquidation fee. So that's the profits from the system. So you hold LUSD when you want to be using it and trading it and paying people in it. And you hold LQTY if you want to receive value accrual from the system. When we talk about reserve, it is over-collateralized. So ideally, it's about 150% over-collateralized. Right now, the entire system is over 200% collateralized. And the lower bound, so the lowest amount it can be over-collateralized is 110%. Below that, you'll be liquidated. And it uses ETH as collaterals. That's it. That's only one asset. People like to compare LUSD with MakerDAO. It's quite similar, but it's also quite different. There are a few differences. One is that the mechanism is quite different. The stability mechanism, the liquidation mechanism is different. Liquity has only one token, one token is collateral, which is ETH. Maker has a lot more different systems. And lastly, there is no changes that can be made in Liquity, whereas you can have a lot of governance mechanisms and voting for Maker. It's not that one is better than the other. It's just that they are different mechanisms. They exist for different reasons. So let's get back to Liquity. How do we create LUSD? We want to mint LUSD. Firstly, you deposit ETH into your troves. Troves are basically your vaults. So think of go to the bank, you have a security deposit, your account. So you put ETH in there. From there, you can take out LUSD to be used and spent. How much LUSD can I take? Well, about 150% of the collateral value. So if I put $150 worth of ETH into my vault, I can take 100 LUSD out. So when the collateral falls, when ETH prices falls, then my security deposit in the bank is worth less, but I still have my LUSD. What do I have to do? Well, I can do 3 things. The first one is I go to the bank and tell them, hey, here's more ETH, put it inside my vault so I can still hold my LUSD. Or I can go to the bank and say, guys, I don't need so much LUSD, let me repay it. It's possible. And the third one is you do nothing. When you do nothing, then you'll be liquidated. What can you do with the LUSD?
So currently the LUSD, it's traded on a number of exchanges like Uniswap, Curve, and we are working on a number of integrations, like you can do yield farming on systems like Pickle, for example, Wasabix, and others. But the main internal use case for LUSD is, of course, the stability pool. So you can use your LUSD that you borrow to become a stability provider. And many people are doing that because they get not only the liquidation gains, but also this LQTY reward.
So one question before we move on to LQTY. When we put LUSD in Curve Pool, in Uniswap and all the other stuff, do they act as oracles to determine the price of LUSD within the system?
No, they don't. So we don't really need an oracle, or I can maybe say that the redemption itself can be used as an oracle, and we are doing that to determine the fees because we also have a borrowing fee. So the fact that people are redeeming, at least if they are behaving rationally, means that LUSD is trading below parity, and we are using that signal as to determine the fees. But we are not reliant on any external LUSD, USD oracle.
So you mentioned that it was a feeless system, but there is a borrowing fee involved. What is the difference between these two types of fees?
So it's an interest-free system. It's not entirely feeless, but we only have an upfront fee for borrowers, which is determined as a percentage of the borrowed amount. And it's not paid upfront, but it's just your debt would be slightly higher when you open a position than what you get as a loan. So when you repay, you need to repay a little bit more than the amount that you took out as a loan. But this fee is fixed at the beginning, and it's fixed according to a formula which is completely algorithmically determined. And it has a minimum. The minimum is 0.5%, and most of the time the fee is hovering around the minimum. So it only went up to 1.1% at some point, but normally it's between 1.5 and 1.6%, I would say. And this fee is determined exactly based on the redemption volumes. Because the more people redeem, that's a signal that the LUSD is trading below parity. So we need to make sure that loans become more expensive because we don't want to rely just on the redemption mechanism as the only monetary mechanism to shrink the monetary supply. But we also want to make sure that the monetary supply cannot grow as fast by making loans more expensive.
So just to make sure that I got the thing correct, instead of, let's say, make a system where it's a continuous amount that has to be paid, this is a one-time payment. And this one-time payment is not defined by a person deciding it, but this is fixed in the algorithm. And it is dynamic because if more people are borrowing, then the interest rates or the borrowing rates changes. And this is a one-time fee. Do you pay it off when you borrow or do you pay it off when you repay?
Yeah, you pay it off when you repay because it's just added to your debt. Like you get like maybe 1,000 LUSD as a loan, but your debt would be 1,050. So when you repay, you need to repay a bit more than what you got.
So let's say if I have $100 worth of ETH in the system and I borrowed some money out and then ETH increases in price, appreciates. And so I can borrow more money out now. How does that affect the borrowing rates?
You basically always borrow at the current rate. So maybe you already have a debt of 100 or 80, and then you take out another debt of 20, but maybe this 20 part will be slightly higher, maybe 21, due to a higher fee. So it doesn't affect the part that you already borrowed. The fee is fixed. So that's also the beauty of it because you have this kind of predictability. It's different from variable interest rate because you know you already had the fee fixed at the beginning. You are not subject to any changes.
Awesome. I think that will lead us very nicely to LQTY, the native token that's a governance token, kind of. What does it do and how does it work?
So it's not really a governance token, but it's kind of similar because it is there to capture the revenue. But given that we don't have a governance, we don't have any voting rights attached to those tokens, since the system is completely immutable, which is also relatively unique, I would say, in the space. So what those tokens do is that they give stakers the possibility to earn fees from the system by staking their LQTY tokens. So whoever stakes LQTY would then become eligible to a pro rata share of the borrowing fee and the redemption fee. I didn't mention we also have a redemption fee. It's also determined based on a very similar formula as the borrowing fee. So those two fees, they are charged in LUSD for the borrowing fee and in Ether when it comes to redemptions. And those two fees, they are captured by the system and they are paid out to whoever stakes LQTY. So the LQTY is like a dividend or like a share that gives you the dividend.
Awesome. Next point, how does the system maintain stability? What is the stability mechanism? And here, the stability mechanism is the entire liquidation method. So when we talk about liquidation, we're talking about what happens when the collaterals fall. We're talking about stabilization, we're talking a little bit more about how to maintain that $1. Because it's not an algo stablecoin, it's just reserve backed, we don't have to care too much about the stability because it's just going to be $1 because it's backed by ETH. We want to focus on liquidation because the collateral could change in value. So these are two different things and we use them differently with the different kind of mechanisms that goes into creating these stablecoins. So liquidation. The liquidation in this stablecoin of Liquity is pretty much the stabilization mechanism. In the stabilization mechanism, it basically has this thing called the auto liquidation method. Remember when people put ETH in and they take LUSD out, right? What can you do with this LUSD? Well, there is this big liquidation pool in the system. You can take your LUSD and put it in the system. What will the system do? Well, when ETH prices drop, then liquidation will happen. This is the auto-liquidation method. If the person doesn't repay, they're auto-liquidated. When you're auto-liquidated, it means that you have to burn off the LUSD and close that vault, right? Close that trove and take that ETH out. But if the person didn't liquidate, where is the LUSD coming from? Well, it's coming from that big community pool. Let's say there's 100 LUSD in and we need to burn 100 LUSD. So you take 100 LUSD from the pool, you burn it, and then you put ETH in. So in the long run, this liquidation pool will have less and less LUSD and more ETH. And the proportion that you get the ETH is in proportion to how much LUSD you put in at that time of the pool. So these are different calculations that's made on the smart contract. And now you're thinking, okay, so that's how it works. That's what I can use my LUSD for to get ETH. And how does the system know when to liquidate or who to liquidate? Well, firstly, anyone can call for liquidation. And secondly, the collateral ratio is ranked. So the lower your collateral ratio, your C ratio, the higher probability that you'll be liquidated. So a person or anyone could check the system and say that, oh, it's time for liquidation. These people have a lower than 110% liquidation. They can call that contract, they'll be liquidated, and the person who says it's time to liquidate, they will get some fees. So they'll get 200 LUSD plus 0.5% of the value of the vault. The liquidation mechanism. That is something that's quite different in Liquity compared to the other kind of protocols. A very similar kind of concept compared to Liquity would be MakerDAO, for instance, because MakerDAO also has a similar concept. You give ETH to MakerDAO, you keep it in the vault, and then you can borrow DAI out. With MakerDAO, you need 150% worth of ETH there, or 175% worth of ETH, depending on the vault, then you get your DAI out. With Liquity, you don't need so much. So can you share a little bit about what the liquidation mechanism is and how is it different from MakerDAO?
Yeah, in MakerDAO and in most other platforms, what you basically do is you start an auction or some process when your trove or when the loan's collateral ratio drops below this minimum threshold. So at that point, you start looking for a buyer or somebody who bails out the borrower underwater. However, in Liquity, we kind of turn things on its head. What we do is we already collect funds that can be used in case of a liquidation to immediately repay the debt of a liquidated borrower. And we do that by introducing two mechanisms. The first one is a stability pool. You can think of the stability pool as an insurance pool. Everybody who owns LUSD, our stablecoin, can deposit LUSD into the pool and become like a guarantor of everybody's loans. Now, when the system needs to liquidate a position, it can simply take out the amount corresponding to the debt from the stability pool and simply burn those tokens and cancel the debt. So then the system is at whole again. And in return, and as an incentive for the stability providers or depositors, the system would simply take the collateral from the liquidated borrower, which should be around 110, like slightly below 110% of the value of the debt that is liquidated. And then it distributes this collateral proportionally or pro rata among all the stability providers. So ideally, the stability providers, they lose 100 of their LUSD that they put in the pool and they gain slightly less than 110 of the value in form of Ether from every liquidation.
Okay, so let me summarize and see if I got this right. So with Maker and with other systems, you have your vault, and if it falls below the collateralization ratio, for Maker, you get auction out. You get auction, and then people will vote and bid, and then that will be basically covered by someone else. In Liquity, the main difference is that you collect LUSD from people first, keep it somewhere. There'll be like an insurance. So once something is liquidated, something needs to be paid off, the debt needs to be paid off, you just take it from this insurance pool. So this insurance pool is like a bucket. The bucket only has LUSD. Then when the collateral ratio falls below, so they're kind of like margin called, then you use this LUSD, burn it, and then unlock the vault and put that vault stuff, which is ETH, into this pool. So if you put LUSD in, instead of taking LUSD, you can take ETH out now. That's the general concept of the liquidation mechanism for Liquity. Am I right?
Yeah, that's a perfect summary.
The second one is a redemption mechanism. What is that?
That goes back basically to the fact that our system is interest-free. So I have to explain why we need a redemption, because normally, or in other systems, there is an interest rate to control the amount of loans that are given out over time and ultimately control the peg. Because by expanding monetary supply through loans, you can expand the monetary supply and make sure that the price goes down, and vice versa. When you make loans, people are incentivized to pay back loans due to high interest rate, then the monetary supply would shrink, which would push back the price or make it become higher. In our case, we don't have interest rates, so we needed another mechanism or even a set of mechanisms. And the main one is the redemption, which is kind of similar to what centralized stablecoins offer. Like USDC, for example, like every USD holder can theoretically exchange USDC at face value. And in our case, it's also possible to exchange LUSD at face value But what you get back is not a fiat dollar, because we don't have that, but we have ETH in the system. So you would get paid in ETH. When you own like 100 LUSD and you redeem them for ETH, you would get $100 worth of ETH. And it can be that those Ether tokens are worth more than the LUSD that you lost through the redemption, because the redemptions are also a way of burning LUSD. So it leads to like a shrinking of the monetary supply.
So in this case, for example, when you mentioned during 19th of May 2021, the lowest price of LUSD is 97 cents. So if I have 100 LUSD, if I go out to the open market, it's worth $97 instead of $100. But if I use it within the Liquity ecosystem, the primary market, it's always seen as $100. You don't care what the secondary market says, you're always looking at it for $100. And the main utility you use within this primary market is to turn this LUSD into ETH. So that's the redemption mechanism that you have in the system.
Right. Yeah, that's the point of the redemption. And then there is the other part of it, which is where does the system get the ETH from to pay out to the redeemer? And that's a bit unusual, maybe, because the system doesn't have its own Ether pool, but it only has the Ether held as collateral in the borrower's positions, like in the troves. So what happens is that those troves, they are sorted by collateralization ratio. Like the one with the lowest collateralization ratio is at the bottom of the list. Now, when somebody redeems a number of LUSD tokens, the protocol would start at this trove with the lowest collateralization ratio and use the redeemed LUSD to repay that trove's debt. And in return, it also gives an equivalent amount of Ether, but based on this face value, like it's always 1-to-1 with the US dollar, it gives that part of the Ether to the redeemer. This shouldn't lead to a loss when you look at the borrower, because the borrower would keep the surplus. So when a borrower, let's say the one with the lowest collateralization ratio, had a debt of 1,000 LUSD and collateral worth 1,200 US dollars, then after redemption, this borrower would be left with zero debt and $200 worth of Ether. And it's just an inconvenience maybe for whoever is affected, but it's basically just exchanging the same value.
So the borrower still has $200 worth of ETH in his vault, and he has 1,000 LUSD that's out circulating. So instead of having $1,200 worth of ETH, of which $1,000 is debt that has to be repaid, and 1,000 LUSD circulating, he removes the debt, and now he has $1,000 in LUSD and $200 in ETH, because someone actually pays off his debt. So one thing that's very different from Liquity to all the other stablecoins is that there is no governance. And I find this very interesting because remember, when we're creating all these different systems, we want it to be anti-fragile, we want it to be robust enough. As much as we can code everything into smart contract and make it very robust, sometimes there's things that could happen and you just can't always take that into consideration, and you can't code everything into smart contract. So you always have some form of leeway of governance so that people in your system can come in to say, hey, I want to change this, hey, I want to change that because the market changed, so I want to change that. But Liquity is different. Liquity does not have that. In Liquity itself, the mechanism is hard-coded, so you can't change anything that's in the system, at least in the primary market. What they can do is they partner with other protocols to allow different kind of changes. So it could be working with, let's say, like an affiliated or partner protocol in a different blockchain, like on Matic or BSC or Solana, whatever. Or they can partner with other protocols to increase the usability of LUSD. So that is the things that can be changed, which is more in the secondary market. But everything in the primary market cannot be changed and is fixed. Is it just impossible for anyone to change anything in the system?
It's really not possible, and this is kind of part of our decentralization strategy. We take it very seriously. It has three aspects to it. We are only using Ether because Ether is kind of the most decentralized token in the Ethereum ecosystem, and then we are not running our own front end. We have a set of decentralized front ends who also get an incentive for running a front end. And then the third aspect to it is that we are not keeping any rights or admin rights over the platform, and we are not even using a governance mechanism, because governance mechanisms are also subject to issues where whales control, like the voting rights. Many people, they just don't care, so they are not actively voting. So it's very easy to manipulate the outcome by just having like a small relative majority. And that's why we really wanted to create a system which is kind of puristic, and it's not just decentralized to be decentralized, but it's really decentralized. But yeah, I mean, it has its downs, like it has its risks, because if there is a bug, we cannot change the code. All we can do is redeploy a new system and make sure that there is some way of migrating from the old system to the new one. But we are confident that this won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important in this aspect because with protocols, you're decentralizing in three ways. So the first one is your protocol is decentralized because no one can change that. It's 100% executed by machines, can change that. It's completely decentralized. Your collateral is also decentralized, so no one can have any monster share. I mean, you can be very rich like Justin Sun, but you can have majority of whatever ETH is out there. And the front end is also decentralized. I think that's fantastic for the philosophy of DeFi anyway. So now that we have some understanding of what Liquity is, let's go to some opinions. Firstly, the whole idea of no governance. I think that's great because if something is well designed, you don't need to change anything. So it's completely decentralized. It's decentralized in the front end. So the Liquity protocol, the team just creates the mechanism, the protocol itself. While the front end is done by other people. It's decentralized. The asset ETH is also decentralized. There is no one person who can come in and do funny business. We saw that there is this huge jump one day where basically Justin Sun put a lot of ETH in there to be minting LUSD. And that's fine. It's not like 90% of the ETH is owned by Justin Sun. Anyone can go out and just buy that. So it could be a whale, but it's not a big holder of the asset. So that's good. And it's also decentralized because the entire execution is done smart contract, no one can change that. So I think this is a good step forward. And another thing to note is that a lot of these tokens right now, a lot of these protocols, they always have governance token. Great, but people need to be voting actively, people need to be active in the system, people need to be updated, people need to recommend different changes to improve it altogether. You can't just rely on people's willingness to do it. There must be an incentive to want to make all these different changes. And at the end of the day, nobody has time to be governing so many protocols at once. There's only so much time in a day, and you have a life outside of just making governance decisions. So having no governance could be a right step in some of these protocols because maybe governance is really not needed because some things can just be codified in the programmable rules of smart contracts, and that's good enough. So this could be a good step in the right direction for certain kind of protocols. And the other thing is that it has better liquidation. So one of the problems with Maker, at least in March 2020, is that the liquidation was very slow. The whole auction process was very slow. And it resulted in a lot of people losing a lot of money. That's not good at all. But here, we're talking about better liquidation mechanisms where the liquidation is auto-liquidated and it helps to reduce the latency of these differences. And that's a mechanism moving forward. Maker has a different mechanism where it's not current prices for the oracles, there's a time lag, and that could work in their mechanism. So it's not that better liquidation means auto-liquidation. There are many different ways to deal with liquidation mechanisms. And this is how Liquity is dealing with it. So the whole reason I wanted to share this with you is that Liquity has the very same kind of concept, but they do things differently. And when you're creating your protocol, when you're creating all these different stablecoin mechanisms, or even just non-stablecoin mechanisms, you don't have to follow things that's out there. You don't have to copy and paste projects out there. You can come up with new ideas. And it's all about experimentation. Come up with new ideas, create new ideas, test new ideas. All ideas could work, but there could be new ideas in your head waiting to be explored. And that is something that we want to look at. DeFi is not something that's fixed. DeFi is still moving, DeFi is still growing. So we want to come together to create a better system, to experiment with new ways of doing things. All ways could work, but new ways could be much better. So I want to encourage you to go and explore. Stop believing in the status quo. Start questioning what the status quo is and start challenging that. So if you're interested in more things like that, we have the book and the academy that you should check out. So book.economicsdesign.com, academy.economicsdesign.com to learn more and be good if you're a protocol designer and you want to get started. This is a very helpful tool for you to get started. And if you are an investor, if you want to understand a little bit more about how we look at designing and measuring primary market, the robustness, go to econtary.com. There we show all these different measures and metrics that we use to analyze stablecoins and other protocols. Till then, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!